don't know what it is, but when a company reaches a certain size, they almost always become pure evil. From poisoning entire cities, to creating a drug epidemic, to literally killing babies. There is nothing megacorps won't do to squeeze out as much profit as possible. Bro, I swear most of these companies would nuke half the world if it meant their stock price would go up $1. But you know, this got me thinking, which company is the most evil? Well, let's take a look and you be the judge. Nestle, or Nestle, is one of the largest food companies on the planet, and they own over 2,000 brands. There's a decent chance you have something in your kitchen that they made. Kit Kats, Nescafe, Gerber, Purina, so on and so on. Well, in a few minutes, you're gonna wanna take all that shit out of your pantry and burn it in a fire. You know, growing up, I actually really liked Nestle, okay? I liked the Crunch Bar. I liked that chocolate milk powder that would put you in a diabetic coma after 3 sips. And I had fond memories of that chocolate rabbit from those commercials.
Nestle Quick, it's magic in the making.
Nesquik is the kind of brand you associate with the innocence of youth. A simpler time back before your dad left the family and your uncle became an international fugitive. Well, it turns out the family-friendly image is incredibly ironic considering the fact that Nestle spent the last 50 years killing babies. No, seriously, they got caught running a marketing scheme that contributed to massive infant mortality in developing countries. Yeah, I didn't want to believe it either, but turns out that chocolate rabbit is a serial killer. The signs were there all along, we just all ignored it. So yeah, let's talk about the Nestle formula scandal. In the 1970s, Nestle started aggressively marketing infant formula across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And when I say aggressively, I mean they sent sales representatives into hospitals dressed as nurses. These women would walk into maternity wards and hand out free samples of formula to new mothers along with pamphlets. They'd convince the mothers that the formula was just as good as breast milk, sometimes better. In some cases, they even visited the mothers at home after they left the hospital to make sure they were still using the product. Now, here's the thing about breastfeeding. If a nursing mother stops doing it for an extended period, her titties stop producing milk. The free samples that the fake nurses handed out lasted just long enough for the mother to naturally stop producing. So once the calcium tap ran dry, the mothers had no choice but to buy more Nestle formula. So they were forced to water it down to make it last longer, which meant the babies weren't getting enough nutrients. And in a lot of these communities, the water itself wasn't clean. So they would either use dirty water, which would endanger the babies even more, or they would have to buy water bottles from Nestle. That's a whole nother rabbit hole we'll get into in a second. So I don't think I need to spell out what happened next. The backlash was massive. In 1977, activists launched an international boycott against Nestle that became one of the most famous corporate boycotts in history. It spread across multiple countries and lasted years. Whole thing got so bad that the World Health Organization stepped in and created an entire international code of marketing breast milk substitutes. And while these rules were being set, Nestle was branching out from child killing to child slavery. In 2021, the US Supreme Court heard a case involving allegations that Nestle had aided and abetted forced child labor on cocoa farms in the Ivory Coast. So we're talking about kids as young as 11 being trafficked from neighboring countries to work on these farms, allegedly. The plaintiffs argued that Nestle's financial support and purchasing agreement with these farms made them complicit. Eventually, the Supreme Court dismissed the case, but not because they said the child slavery wasn't happening, just because they said it couldn't be tried in America since Nestle is a French company and this was happening in Africa. But that didn't stop Nestle from using these dismissals as evidence that they did nothing wrong. So while they didn't get punished legally, the slavery thing was definitely not good PR. Nestle promised to take steps to reduce their dependence on slave chocolate and slapped a fair trade label on some of their chocolate bars, which was a guarantee that slavery was not used in the chocolate supply chain of that particular product. Not all their chocolate has this label on it. You know, I'll let you Figure out why that is. Okay, but to their credit, they have definitely reduced the amount of slavery in their supply chain, but I mean, we only have some slaves now. It's kind of like a guy going on trial for murdering 17 people and his defense is, but your honor, I only killed 2 people. Is the judge gonna say, you only killed 2 people? Well, that's better than 17, I guess. No, he's gonna go to prison. Now, this stuff is already bad enough, but we're not even done yet. To top off the shit Sunday, we need to talk about Nestle's obsession with owning water. This is so comically evil that it's almost funny. In the town of Osceola, Michigan, Nestle extracted hundreds of thousands of dollars of groundwater and sold it back to people in bottles while paying next to nothing for the permits. While the streams in the town were drying up, Nestle's tankers were full of that sweet H2O. So they were basically privatizing a public resource and forcing people to buy their microplastic infused bottles. Nestle CEO Peter Brabeck once said that water being a human right was extreme. His position was that water should be privatized and given a market value. Gotta bring back guillotines, man. That's not a call to violence, by the way. This is a completely unrelated thought I just had. Guillotines are cool. Purdue Pharma was a family-owned pharmaceutical company. We love a family business, don't we, folks? Well, this particular family, the Sacklers, almost single-handedly created the opioid crisis in the US. Now, I have a personal connection to this one because I almost got addicted to painkillers after I was diagnosed with Gilmore's groin in 2014. Luckily, I kicked it, but unfortunately, I picked up a nasty nitrous oxide addiction instead, but whatever. Let's talk about Purdue Pharma. For most of its history, Purdue Pharma was relatively unremarkable. They had a pretty good reputation and stayed out of the headlines, but that would all change in 1996 when they launched their flagship product, OxyContin. It was this one pill that would turn a mid-tier drug company into a billion-dollar empire practically overnight, and then it imploded just as fast. OxyContin is a time-released, opium-based painkiller. Purdue marketed it as a safer, less addictive alternative to other opioids, and their sales reps convinced doctors that the risk of addiction was less than 1%. The biggest lie since my dad said he was going out to get milk. That less than 1% statistic wasn't based on any clinical evidence or anything. It apparently came from a brief letter to the editor of a medical journal that was never intended to be used as a marketing claim. But Purdue ran with it anyways because, evil. Armed with their fake stats, Purdue started one of the most aggressive drug-pushing campaigns since Pablo Escobar. PP threw lavish conferences at resorts, flew physicians out on all-expense-paid vacations, and handed out huge bonuses to reps based on how many prescriptions they could generate. The whole operation was engineered to flood the market with OxyContin, and it was working. The revenue stream was so good that Nestle tried to privatize it. Prescriptions skyrocketed, revenue went through the roof, and these mother Sacklers were making money hand over dick. But it wouldn't be long till the problems started. So the whole idea behind Oxy is that it was less likely to cause addiction because the onset of the drug was slower and the effects were more sustained. But the thing is, OxyContin's time-release coating could easily be crushed. So users could get the full dose at once, something that PP was well aware of but ignored. A lot of people were now using OxyContin and they were getting hooked fast. And when their prescriptions ran out, a lot of them turned to heroin or fentanyl because it was cheaper and easier to get. Communities across America were gutted. Entire towns in the Rust Belt, Appalachia, and New England had turned into Resident Evil. Since 1999, over 500,000 people have died because of opiates. And this is in large part due to Purdue Pharma's marketing. Now, you're probably wondering if anyone was punished for all this. Well, in 2007, Purdue and 3 of its executives pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges. They admitted they had misled doctors, patients, and regulators about the drug's addiction risk, and the company paid $600 million in fines. Man, that sounds like a lot of money, until you realize how many billions they were making off the drug. Now, you'd think a couple of convictions would put an end to this whole thing, but these schmucks kept going. They were still marketing their drugs, but now they did it a little bit more carefully. After the conviction, Purdue started offering paid kickbacks to doctors and pharmacies to keep prescribing. They found new ways to push the drug that were within regulations, so the bodies kept piling up. But so did the lawsuits. Purdue was getting sued so much that they were forced to file for bankruptcy in 2019. The final nail in the coffin came a year later when the Department of Justice came back for round 2. This time, Purdue pleaded guilty to 3 more federal criminal charges. The total penalties came out to over $8 billion. There was no coming back from that. But what happened to the Sacklers? Well, even though their company was gone, the family had looted over $10 billion from PP before it went bankrupt. Internal documents showed that the family members were fully aware of the addiction crisis their drug was fueling. They saw the reports, they read the numbers, they knew what was happening. When the lawsuits started piling up, they used the bankruptcy process to shield their personal wealth from liability, which is kind of genius in the most evil way possible. Luckily, in 2024, the Supreme Court blocked a proposed settlement that would have given the Sacklers broad immunity from civil lawsuits. The court basically said you can't use anyone else's bankruptcy to make your own problems disappear. A revised settlement was eventually reached, with the Sacklers agreeing to pay up to $6.5 billion. Their names have been quietly removed from museums and university buildings that they once funded with the profits from OxyContin. The Sackler wing at the Met, the Sackler galleries at the Louvre, they're all gone now. But no member of the Sackler family has gone to prison, and at the end of the day, they still have billions of dollars left even after paying all those fines. Now the thing is, Purdue Pharma isn't the only company to blame for the whole opioid crisis. Sure, they played a huge role, but they wouldn't have been able to do it without the good folks at Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson has been around for over 100 years, and today they're the second largest drug and biotech company in the world by market cap. They're behind a ton of brands that we use every day like Tylenol, Benadryl, and Johnson's Baby Shampoo. You know, the one whose slogan was "No More Tears"? Well, kind of ironic because J&J has caused a lot of tears. In the 1890s, J&J created their now infamous baby powder, which was made with talc. Talc is this soft clay-like mineral that's great for absorbing moisture. The best part of it is it has no negative health effects. Unfortunately, talc in its natural state also contains asbestos, which has a lot of negative health effects, okay? You guys remember those mesothelioma commercials?
Attention. If you or a loved one was diagnosed with mesothelioma, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Mesothelioma is a rare cancer linked to asbestos exposure.
Asbestos has also been linked to ovarian cancer. In 1982, a Harvard researcher found that women who were using talcum powder were more than 3 times as likely to get ovarian cancer. More and more evidence of this started coming up throughout the 80s and 90s, but J&J continued to market their product as completely safe enough for babies. But eventually, the chickens, they come home to roost. The first of many talcum powder lawsuits came in 2009. 49-year-old medical assistant Deanne Berg sued Johnson & Johnson after being diagnosed with ovarian cancer. J&J offered her a $1.3 million settlement in exchange for signing a confidentiality agreement, but she declined. Deanne wanted the information to be public. What followed was a brutal court battle with the pharmaceutical giant. With their $1 million legal team, Deanne didn't stand a chance. Oh shit, she won! I wasn't expecting that. Well, kinda. She didn't actually get any money, but a jury found J&J's negligence contributed to her cancer diagnosis. So even though Deanne didn't get a cash injection herself, she opened the floodgates for other people to sue the Johnson off of Johnson & Johnson. As of late 2025, more than 90,000 lawsuits have been filed. J&J was basically bullied into completely halting the sale of talc-based baby powder and switching to a cornstarch alternative. But the best part is they've had to pay billions of dollars. They tried to weasel out of paying settlements by declaring bankruptcy, but were rejected by multiple judges. Some experts estimate that J&J will have to pony up over $11 billion once all the lawsuits are resolved. Now, I mentioned earlier that Purdue Pharma wouldn't have been able to get America addicted to opiates without Johnson & Johnson. Well, that's because J&J was directly involved in the opium supply chain. In the 80s, Johnson desperately needed to score some opium for one of their best-selling products, Tylenol with codeine. God damn, man, they used to put lean in Tylenol? I really was born in the wrong generation. J&J purchased a bunch of poppy farms in Tasmania, but they weren't just using the opium for their own products. They had a surplus, which they sold to other companies like Purdue Pharma. When they were pushing OxyContin heavy, J&J was one of their main suppliers. Oh, and if that wasn't bad enough, it was recently revealed that one of J&J's biggest products, Tylenol, causes autism. I mean, it makes sense. What can I say? My mom took a lot of Tylenol when she was pregnant with me. You know, she told me that. You know, all this talk about evil companies makes me want to talk about a company that isn't evil. And that company is Kickoff, the #1 credit building app on the App Store. Now, I don't have to tell you guys, but your credit matters. Whether it's renting a place, getting approved for a car, buying a house, or even just having better options financially, it makes a real difference. If your credit isn't great right now, Kickoff is probably one of the easiest ways to start building it. It's simple, low pressure, and helps you build credit over time without overcomplicating things. The plan starts at just $5 a month, and your on-time payments get reported to all 3 major credit bureaus. You can even set it to auto-pay so you don't have to think about it. Kickoff users with credit under 600 that made their payments on time increased their credit by an average of 25 points in just the first month, and 86 points in the first year. So it's low effort, low cost, and actually moves the needle. Kind of like and I think that's refreshing considering all the doom and gloom we've been talking about. Right now, Kickoff is giving my audience 80% off their first month. That's just $1 to get started. Click the link in my description to check it out. Thank you, Kickoff. I don't know why I did that thing with my hand, but thanks. Let's get back to the video. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Meta, really? You're putting Facebook on the same category as chemical spillers, opioid shillers, and baby killers? Well, hey man, I gotta pad the runtime somehow. But in all seriousness, Meta is pretty bad. Maybe they're not as comically evil as some of the other guys, but Meta's influence on our society is definitely a net negative.
Check this out.
Wow.
So that's pretty neat.
Now, I was surprised to learn that Facebook is still the biggest social media platform in the world, which is insane because I don't know anybody who uses it. Like, who
Sweet baby Ray's
is using Facebook, bro? Like, the only person I know that still uses Facebook is my Uncle Ruben. I don't know, man, but what I do know is that Facebook collected the data of 87 million users without consent and sold it to companies like Cambridge Analytica, who used it for political advertising. In 2019, the FTC hit them with a $5 billion fine over privacy violations. It was the largest privacy penalty in FTC history. What's insane is that after the announcement, Facebook's stock price actually went up because investors were expecting it to be way worse. You know, so yeah, they take our data and use it to psyop us, but that's only like the 3rd worst thing they've done. Facebook has also been one of the primary drivers of what I like to call the hate economy. I'm sure somebody else already coined that phrase, but I arrived at it independently, damn it. Facebook figured out that when people are angry, they're more likely to interact with posts and stay on their platform longer. They were basically incentivized to rage bait people, so that's exactly what Facebook did. So Facebook has heavily contributed to the current hateful atmosphere and political polarization we got going on right now. Just for some extra clicks. Facebook and, well, every other social media company use psychological tricks to get people addicted to their platforms. And they are well aware of this. In a leaked internal document, one Meta researcher said, Instagram is a drug. We're basically pushers. Which brings me to Meta's second biggest platform, Instagram, which has been shown to be detrimental to teenage girls' mental health. Meta's own researchers found that 32% of teen girls said that Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies and their lives. IG has been blamed for the skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression in teen girls, and some linked it to suicidal thoughts. The company saw this data and decided to push the product onto younger users anyway. Frances Haugen, the Meta whistleblower that leaked these documents, testified before Congress and said that the company consistently chose profits over people's well-being.
Choices being made inside of Facebook are disastrous for our children, for our public safety, for our privacy, and for our democracy.
But all that stuff pales in comparison to what Facebook did in Myanmar. Myanmar, it's a country in Southeast Asia, it used to be Burma. Probably don't think about it too much. I know I don't. But Myanmar was the site of a very recent case of genocide. Throughout the 2010s, there were a lot of ethnic tensions between Myanmar's Buddhist majority and the Rohingya Muslim minority. Now, Facebook was absolutely massive in Myanmar. It was by far the most used website in the country. So a bunch of Buddhist nationalists, along with members of the Myanmar military, used this to their advantage, and they flooded Facebook with anti-Rohingya propaganda. This culminated into a full-on ethnic cleansing, where the military was slaughtering thousands of Rohingyas. According to Amnesty International, Meta was repeatedly warned by activists and researchers about the risk of Facebook being used to foment and incite violence against the Rohingya in the lead up to 2017. Despite these warnings, Facebook did nothing. Moderation in Myanmar was virtually non-existent. They didn't have enough Burmese-speaking moderators to handle the volume of hate speech flowing through the platform. But I mean, despite all that, nothing really happened. Some fines got paid, hearings happened, but the platform is still pretty much the same size and nothing really changed. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever happens. Monsanto was the largest agrochemical company in the US. They made herbicides, they made genetically modified crops, and they made a lot of enemies, like the entire country of Vietnam, for example. Along with Dow Chemical, Monsanto was one of the largest producers of Agent Orange used by the US Army in Vietnam. Unfortunately, even after the war, they continued the trend of giving people cancer with their pesticides. One pesticide in particular, called Roundup, was especially dangerous. To this day, Roundup is the most widely used herbicide in the world. Its active ingredient, glyphosate, has been linked to a bunch of health issues, including cancer. For decades, Monsanto marketed it as safe for humans and the environment, but it turns out it was killing more than just weeds. In 2015, the IARC said glyphosate was probably carcinogenic to humans. And Monsanto took that personally. Monsanto's PR department went on a whole campaign disputing the IARC and continued to affirm that their product was safe for humans. Well, I think you know where this is going. In 2018, Monsanto started getting sued left and right by people who claimed that they were diagnosed with cancer due to Roundup exposure. The first major trial was of a school groundskeeper named Dwayne Johnson. By the way, this is not Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson we're talking about, okay, in case you were confused. But something was cooking, and unfortunately that something was his cells. Johnson was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and evidence showed that he had developed it because of his frequent use of Roundup at his work. The jury found that Monsanto had acted with malice and awarded Johnson $289 million in damages. A year later, another jury awarded $80 million to a guy named Edward Hardiman, who had used Roundup on his property for decades before developing the same cancer. Then came the Pilioid case. They were a married couple who both developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and were initially awarded $2 billion. That was reduced on appeal, but at that point it didn't matter. The message from American juries was loud and clear: Monsanto. As if these legal battles weren't bad enough for Monsanto, the discovery process revealed the extent of their evilness. The documents showed that the company had ghost-written scientific studies and then gotten outside academics to put their names on them. They also pressured regulators and worked to discredit independent researchers who raised concerns about glyphosate. Now, unfortunately, Roundup wasn't the only thing killing people. In Anniston, Alabama, Monsanto had a plant that was producing PCBs, a chemical used in coolants, pesticides, paints, and a bunch of other shit. Turns out PCBs are more toxic than my last marriage, and since the late 1920s, Monsanto had been dumping them into Anniston's rivers and burying tons of the stuff in the ground. By the 70s, it had gotten so bad that all the water around Anniston had basically become poison. Locals were warned not to eat the fish or any vegetables grown in the area because they were contaminated with PCBs. And bro, this is like the same pattern that keeps repeating throughout this video. Monsanto was aware since the 30s that PCBs were toxic and caused cancer and other health issues, but they kept producing them and dumping them. After the news broke in 1971, the plant shut down production of the chemicals, but the damage was already done. To this day, that place is basically Chernobyl. Residents have to wear masks when they cut their grass so they don't breathe in the toxic fumes, and the water supply is still tainted. The residents of Anniston would see some justice, but it wouldn't be until 2003. Monsanto agreed to pay a settlement of about $700 million to residents of the town. Unfortunately, this is not the norm. When regular people go up against these giant megacorporations with their teams of lawyers, it's kind of like a midget in a porn movie. The little guy tends to get f***ed. Sorry for the, crass analogy, but it's the truth. And that's exactly what happened to Percy Schmeisser. He was a canola farmer in Canada. One day he was out there, farming his canolas when all of a sudden the wind blew some of Monsanto's patented GMO seeds into his farm, and Monsanto sued him. One day, Percy noticed that some of his plants were more resistant to pesticides than others, so he kept the seeds from those and planted them, and eventually most of his canola crop was made up of Monsanto's plants. So they sued him on the grounds of a patent infringement. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and Percy lost. Luckily, he didn't have to pay any damages or anything, but still, I think that's a terrible precedent to set. By the mid-2010s, Monsanto was absolutely bleeding money from all the lawsuits. And in 2018, they were purchased by an even bigger, evil-er corporation. Bayer. Now, I'm not really sure why Bayer wanted to buy Monsanto. Maybe they were trying to corner the market on companies who committed war crimes with chemical weapons. Whatever the reason, this might have been the worst purchase in human history. That's including the time I bought a storage shed off Facebook Marketplace that turned out to have a family of little people living in it. After buying Monsanto, Bayer had to take on all of their lawsuits. By 2020, they had to pay billions of dollars to settle existing Roundup claims. And they're still fighting new ones to this day. Over 100,000 lawsuits have been filed, which caused Bayer's stock price to crater harder than my GPA after I discovered World of Warcraft. Since acquiring Monsanto, Bayer has spent more money on legal fees and settlements than most companies earn in a lifetime. So even though the Monsanto name is no longer on the building, the lawsuits aren't going anywhere. I don't know, man. Hearing this just makes me feel so gay. And by that I mean happy, of course. But hearing about the history of Monsanto's new parent company makes me the opposite of happy. Makes me sad. I'm feeling sadness and anger. Bayer was started in 1863 as a textile factory in Berlin, and they mostly sold color dyes. At the time, purple clothes were a hot trend across Europe, and Bayer got in on it. But once the trend passed, they diversified into chemicals and pharmaceuticals. Bayer's big break came in 1897 when they invented aspirin, which, as you can imagine, was massive. Germans could now get as drunk as they wanted to and go to work the next day without a headache. Productivity boomed. Aspirin, man, that's a hard one to follow up. But just a year later, Bayer came out with another banger, a new wonder drug that worked even better than aspirin: heroin. Back then, heroin was sold as a cure for pretty much everything from tuberculosis to the common cold. It was a common cough suppressant for the whole family, children and all. That's right, little Hans was getting messed up off lean in 1898. Now, the really messed up thing is that heroin was marketed as a non-addictive alternative to morphine, which was also invented in Germany about 100 years before. It was even said to be a cure for morphine addiction. Now, of course, we know this is not true at all, and in fact, heroin is more addicting than morphine. Luckily, German regulators figured this out, but took them like 20 years to finally do something about it. In 1914, heroin was restricted to prescription use only. If you're a student of history, you know that 1914 was also the start of World War I. Most people see war and, think of all the death and destruction. Bayer saw an opportunity. They partnered up with some other German chemical companies to create the German School of Chemical Warfare, where they created chlorine gas, which when combined with the water inside of someone's lungs would create an acid that would literally burn soldiers from the inside out. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of Bayer's long history of war crimes. In 1925, Bayer merged with other German chemical companies to form IG Farben, which would be the single largest company in Germany and also the largest donor to this guy, During World War II, IG Farben suddenly got a huge influx of new employees, mostly from Poland. Unfortunately, the pay was shit and a lot of the workers would just randomly stop showing up. A lot of these people were also experimented on by IG Farben's researchers. Meanwhile, IGF was providing the Nazis with Zyklon B, the gas used in the chambers, and methanol, which was used to burn corpses. Dang man, that's a pretty good slogan. The Holocaust. Brought to you by Bayer. At the Nuremberg trials, 24 IG Farben executives were charged with crimes against humanity, but only 13 of them actually received prison sentences. Compared to the severity of the crimes they committed though, the sentences were basically a slap on the dick. The Nuremberg chief prosecutor famously mocked them as light enough to please a chicken thief. Damn, that goes kinda hard. Now, you would think all of this bad publicity would be enough for people to be like, okay, Bayer, you don't get to be a company no more. But no, they not only survived, but they thrived, becoming the third largest pharmaceutical company in the world. And they continued doing messed up shit all the way into the 80s. In fact, other than gay sex, Bayer was one of the primary causes of the AIDS epidemic. In the mid-1980s, they were selling Factor VIII, which was a blood clotting agent used to treat hemophilia. Factor VIII was synthesized using blood plasma from donors. At the height of the HIV pandemic, Bayer was knowingly collecting plasma from at-risk donors like prisoners, heroin users, and gay men. This resulted in anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 hemophiliacs in the US alone getting infected with HIV. I mean, that doesn't sound like a crazy number, but it is when you consider how rare hemophilia is. It was a huge proportion. Once this came to light, Bayer figured out a way to kill the HIV virus in the drug and developed a safer version of Factor VIII, which for some reason they did not name Factor IX. Kind of a missed opportunity. Now here's the really up thing. They still had a massive stockpile of the old contaminated batch, and instead of throwing it away, they just sold it all to poor countries in Asia. And like, Bayer had to pay more money in legal settlements than they made on selling this stuff, so they basically killed a bunch of people for no reason. Even after this, Bayer just continued to dominate the industry. That is, until 2018. Since buying Monsanto, Bayer's share price plummeted 60% due to all the settlements they were forced to pay. As of March 2026, Bayer is worth $20 billion, which is less than what they bought Monsanto for. So in a way, Monsanto might have actually been one of the best companies ever, because they almost single-handedly destroyed Bayer. During the Vietnam War, Dow, along with Monsanto, was one of the primary manufacturers of Agent Orange. Now, despite its name, this was not a delicious citrus-flavored beverage. Agent Orange was a herbicide that the US military sprayed across millions of acres of Vietnamese jungle to strip away the Viet Cong's cover. The primary ingredient in Agent Orange was dioxin, one of the most toxic substances known to man. So in addition to killing the trees, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese civilians were killed or maimed because of this stuff. 500,000 children were born with birth defects. Not even the Americans were safe. Many veterans came back sick with cancer, neurological disorders, and respiratory diseases because of their exposure to Agent Orange. Now, as you can imagine, Dow got a lot of shit for this. Their official corporate position is that Agent Orange was produced at the government's direction and that they bear no responsibility for how it was used, which is, you know, a convenient thing to say after you cash all the checks. Following Vietnam, Dow's body count continued to pile up. Back home in Midland, Michigan, where Dow was headquartered, decades of chemical production left the surrounding area contaminated with dioxin. Now, Dow tried to downplay the risk of dioxin publicly, but privately, the company was well aware that the stuff was toxic as shit. All the land and water within miles of the facility had been contaminated, but in 2023, the EPA came down on them hard. Dow had to pay the EPA $54 million and clean up their mess. $54 million for decades of contamination. That's kind of like getting a parking ticket for burning down a building. Hey guys, I actually wanted to make a correction here. I was wrong. It wasn't $54 million. It was $5.4 million. People who lived in the area that experienced health issues tied to dioxin have been trying to fight Dow for years with no success, despite the known links between the chemical and cancer and other diseases. And it's not even the worst one. On December 2nd, 1984, a pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, leaked 40 tons of toxic gas into the surrounding neighborhoods. Many people woke up choking on the fumes. Others didn't wake up at all. The estimated death toll ranges from 3,800 to 16,000, depending on the source. And that was just in the immediate aftermath, not even counting the residual effects. Over 500,000 people were exposed to this stuff. Survivors and their children still suffer from birth defects, cancer, and lung issues to this day. Their water supply was also contaminated, which exacerbated everything. Now, the chemical leak wasn't actually Dow's fault. It was caused by another company called Union Carbide, which Dow purchased in 2001. After buying the company, Dow made it very clear that the disaster was Union Carbide's responsibility. So they bought the company and absorbed its assets, but none of its liabilities. Just like my ex-wife, man, they got all of the money and none of the blame. Eventually, the people of Bhopal were given an insulting $500 each in compensation. You know what? That's a good t-shirt idea. You know, my entire family was brutally killed by toxic chemical exposure, and all I got was $500 in this lousy shirt. When it comes to poisoning people with chemicals, Dow comes second only to Dupont. So it's fitting that the two of them merged in 2015. So let's talk about the other half of the merger. Dupont, it's not just one of the most evil companies in the world, but possibly one of the weirdest families of all time. They make chemicals and materials like nylon, Kevlar, and Teflon. Now, for all the other companies in this video, I don't really care about their backstory, but the lore of the Dupont family is so insane that it needs to be talked about. Like, they had two family members that blew themselves up, one murdered an Olympic gold medalist, and another one literally helped create the United States. The history of Dupont stands with Pierre Samuel Dupont, a Parisian watchmaker who served as Commerce Secretary for King Louis XVI himself. In 1783, he helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution and officially recognized the United States as an independent nation. He even befriended some of the founding fathers. In fact, Ben Franklin called him one of the very great men of the age. Oh, Ben, if only you knew what they did to us. Not long after the signing, Pierre's political position in France would quickly come to an end when the French Revolution broke out. So in 1789, the French public was starting to get fed up with the cost of bread and the lack of availability. On October 5th of that year, the resentment boiled over and turned into a straight-up bloodthirsty mob that stormed the palace where the king and Marie Antoinette were staying. Pierre Dupont and his son actually physically defended Marie and the king from the mob that day. Unfortunately, this would lead to him getting thrown in prison and sentenced to death a few years later when Louis was overthrown. Somehow, though, Pierre managed to avoid the guillotine and fled to America with his sons. They eventually settled in Delaware, where one of the sons, Eleuthère, started a gunpowder factory. And let me tell you, business was booming. Get it? Because gunpowder, it exploded. In the War of 1812, Dupont became one of the US's biggest suppliers of gunpowder. As a reward, Pierre's other son, Victor, was named as the director of the newly formed Bank of the United States, which was like the precursor to the Federal Reserve, which made the DuPonts even richer and powerfuler. That's not a word. Which made the DuPonts even richer and more powerful. Meanwhile, Eleuthère was pretty much monopolizing the gunpowder business. By the time he died in 1834, the company was pumping out almost 1 million pounds of gunpowder every year, which is almost enough for an average Chinese fireworks show. With every war America was involved in, the DuPont fortune grew. These guys were like the OGs of the military-industrial complex. After the US Civil War, Lamont DuPont thought that the family business had plateaued, and he wanted to expand out of gunpowder. Back in Europe, a Swedish schmuck named Alfred Nobel just invented a delicious new way to blow people up: dynamite. By the way, this is the same Nobel that the Peace Prize is named after, if you didn't know. Irony. Anyways, Lamont founded Dow Chemical Company in 1880, which manufactured nitroglycerin, the main component in dynamite that makes it go boom. And of course, they dumped the leftover chemicals into the Delaware River, kicking off the long-standing family tradition of dumping harmful chemicals into our drinking water. More on that later. Now, playing with explosives is dangerous business, especially nitroglycerin, which is very unstable. This is a lesson Lamont learned the hard way when he blew up. In March of 1884, his factory exploded, killing him and 5 others. Now, the wild thing is, he wasn't even the first Dupont to meet this fate. 27 years earlier, Lamont's uncle, Alexis, was also blown up in a factory explosion. I guess the apple doesn't explode far from the tree. Now, you would think all of this stuff would teach the Duponts not to mess around with dangerous chemicals, but you'd be very wrong. By 1913, DuPont had grown so big and so powerful that the federal government designated them a monopoly and forced them to split up into 3. After World War I, DuPont started diversifying into non-explosive chemicals, especially plastics. In the 30s, they invented synthetic materials like nylon and polyester. If that's not evil, I don't know what is, bro. These guys are the reason my scrotum is infested with microplastics. Thanks a lot, fuckers. But their biggest innovation came on April 6th, 1938. While experimenting in a lab, a group of DuPont chemists accidentally discovered a miracle material that seemed not to break down at high temperatures. They called it Teflon. Before long, Teflon was everywhere. It was used in the creation of the atomic bomb, it was used to manufacture raincoats, airplane parts, and of course, non-stick cookware, which was sold to housewives under the name Happy Pan. But they might as well have called it Cancer Pan. You see, Teflon contains PFAs, chemicals that are highly durable and don't break down. That's why they're also called forever chemicals, because they stick around forever. In our drinking water, in the soil that we grow crops in, even in our bodies, forever. PFAs are linked to a wide range of health problems, including hormone imbalances, damage to the immune system, and, of course, cancer. It definitely should not surprise you at all to learn that as far back as the 1960s, internal studies at DuPont showed that they knew about the risks of PFAs, but chose not to warn the public for decades. It would be another 30 years before the public was made aware that they were actively being poisoned. It all started with a farmer in West Virginia in the 90s. He noticed his cows were all randomly dying. 153 of his cows dropped dead, all with blood dripping from their noses and mouths. The EPA came out and tested the river that the cows had been drinking from, and it was absolutely teeming with chemicals. They also noticed the river happened to be downstream from the Dupont factory. Dupont denied any wrongdoing, so the farmer reached out to lawyer Rob Billet, who filed a class action lawsuit against them, which over 70,000 people joined in on. It took years, but eventually the case was settled. DuPont was found responsible not only for contaminating the drinking water for people in West Virginia, but PFAs had potentially poisoned billions of people worldwide. Pretty much everyone. This was the subject of a movie called Dark Waters, starring Mark Ruffalo. Funnily enough, he also starred in Foxcatcher as Dave Schultz, an Olympic gold medal wrestler who was murdered in 1996 by John DuPont. Yeah, you know what? This might sound harsh, but I think the DuPonts really need to go back to their family tradition of blowing themselves up. Now, how much did DuPont actually pay for their crimes? Which really is not enough, considering that a 2015 study found that PFA chemicals are in 97% of Americans' blood. In the years since, DuPont claims to have switched to less toxic materials, but I don't know, man. I don't trust them. This is like when my Uncle Ruben says he's gonna stop trying to seduce my girlfriends, okay? He's done it 7 times now. So his word doesn't really mean much, and neither does DuPont's. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil Company. At its height, it controlled over 90% of U.S. oil refinery, which is, in my opinion, a bit too much. The Supreme Court agreed. In 1911, they designated Standard Oil as a monopoly and broke it up into 34 different companies. Okay, I'm gonna skip past a few decades of corporate bullshit and go to November 30th, 1999. 2 of Standard Oil's offshoots merged to form ExxonMobil, which immediately became the largest non-government owned oil company in the world, and it continues to be at the top today. Now, there's a lot of oil companies, and they're all evil. What makes ExxonMobil stand out? Well, many reasons. A big one is climate change denial. I know this is probably gonna get me a lot of shit from the chuds in my audience, but hear me out, okay? Leaked internal documents shown that Exxon's own researchers knew there was a connection between fossil fuels and climate change all the way back to 1981. Publicly, though, they denied the links and spent tons of money suppressing this research and lobbying for politicians who didn't believe in it. This became kind of apparent in the early 80s when Exxon declined to develop a giant natural gas reserve which was discovered in Indonesia. Even though it would have brought in billions of dollars, internal assessments showed it would require venting shit tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, enough to visibly accelerate global warming, which would trigger stricter regulations. So in the end, Exxon chose restraint, not out of any environmental concern, but because, you know, they got together, they crunched the numbers and decided that the ROI wasn't good. After years of mounting evidence and public pressure, Exxon finally promised in 2007 that within a year it would stop funding climate change denial. They were lying and continued to financially support denialists like Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe.
We keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record. I asked the chair, you know what this is?
It's a snowball.
And that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
But Danny, man-made climate change isn't even real. Look, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I don't like to get political on this channel here. But I'm just saying, mega corporations who have a vested interest in you not believing in climate change spend a lot of money to convince you it's not real. Just something to think about. Plus, you know, I don't think breathing in petrochemical fumes is great for your health. Like, I'm pretty sure you're better off eating hot Cheetos and ripping nitrous oxide than breathing in smog. But okay, let's say the pollution in the air isn't a big deal. Well, don't worry. Exxon also pollutes the water. Exxon has been at the center of quite a few major oil spills. Let's start with the one in March of 1989. An Exxon oil tanker spilled 10.8 million gallons into Prince William Sound in Alaska.
Exxon has come under heavy criticism for not moving more rapidly to clean up the spill. The crews have not arrived yet to begin cleaning the slime off the island's beaches and rocks. That probably won't happen until next week.
The company was ordered to pay $1 billion in criminal fines, but this wasn't even their worst offense. In 1973, a Coast Guard helicopter flying over Newton Creek in Brooklyn, New York, noticed that the water was basically oil. An investigation revealed that 30 million gallons of petrol products had been dumped into the water. That's a lot. But unlike the Alaska spill that had happened all at once, this was a slow process. The oil had been leaking into the creek since the late 1800s, back when Exxon was still Standard Oil. What's wild is that after being warned about this, Exxon didn't do shit. They sat on their asses until the 90s when they finally started taking steps to pump oil out of the region. But by then, even more oil had seeped into the ground and contaminated 100 acres of land and created like an underground lake of oil. When they were sued by the area's residents who claimed they had suffered health defects from drinking gasoline basically, Exxon only had to pay like $20 million, which is nothing. And these were just the two most notorious cases. There's plenty of other ones like the spills in the Mississippi River or the 2013 Pegasus pipeline rupture in Arkansas.
Incredible, and that is oil.
But okay. Most of these were accidents, like, oops, I just contaminated the drinking water of millions of people and destroyed an entire ecosystem. I get it. It happens. I'm not perfect. I'm close, but I'm not perfect. Anyways, what definitely isn't an accident is the geopolitical scandals and human rights abuses that Exxon has committed. Like when they pretty much took control of an entire country. In 2007, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez nationalized the country's last privately run oil fields, kicking Exxon out of the country. This was a massive problem because Venezuela had the world's largest crude oil deposits. So Exxon started searching in the region for other sources of oil. After years of looking, they finally found it in Guyana, a country whose only claim to fame is the Jonestown Massacre. In 2015, Exxon announced that they'd found 10 billion barrels of that sweet, sweet oil off the coast. So they immediately started bribing Guyanese politicians and trying to win favor with the public, promising big investments. They also sponsored the national cricket team, which is their most popular sport, and slapped their logo on the team's uniforms. Today, Exxon is pretty much running Guyana, and it's producing 650,000 barrels of oil per day, while allegedly ignoring environmental rules. According to one journalist, the line between the state and ExxonMobil is blurring, making it harder to distinguish where one ends and the other begins. Now, to be fair, Guyana's GDP has blown up since Exxon started drilling, but if you know anything about GDP, it's not necessarily a good indicator of quality of life. Poverty continues to be rampant, with 43% of people living on less than $6 a day, and Guyana has one of the highest unemployment rates in Latin America. Most of the infrastructure that Exxon promised has been handled by Chinese firms using foreign workers. So are they better off than before? Yeah, I guess. But the prosperity is mostly reserved for the Guyanese politicians and Exxon executives. Tale as old as time. But honestly, that's nothing compared to the time they funded a private army that tortured and killed a bunch of people. In 2001, ExxonMobil was accused of doing some downright heinous shit in Indonesia. In the 90s, Indonesia was in the middle of a civil war between the government and a separatist insurgency group in the western region of Aceh, where ExxonMobil happened to have a natural gas plant. When the civil war started heating up, Exxon decided to hire a private military security force to protect its investment. According to a lawsuit, the soldiers went out on raids to local villages around the plant, where they proceeded to beat, torture, and the local villagers. And it gets more disturbing. According to the suit, pregnant women were forced to jump repeatedly before being sexually assaulted, and men were mutilated with electric shocks, burns, and knife-inflicted graffiti. What the fuck, man? Well, that was ExxonMobil, and they're going to be pretty tough to beat. But this next company is a top shareholder of ExxonMobil. In fact, they hold stakes in every single company we've talked about so far, other than Purdue Pharma. Oh, and they also have a mysterious supercomputer that predicts the future and is named after a Disney character. I'm talking, of course, about Blackrock is the world's largest asset manager. They manage anywhere between $12 to $14 trillion, which is more than the GDP of every country on earth other than the US and China. The company is the brainchild of Larry Fink. You've probably heard of him from conspirators on the internet who say he runs the world. Well, I mean, they're kind of right, to be fair. Larry Fink started his career in 1976 at the investment firm First Boston, where he pioneered mortgage-backed securities, which, if you've ever seen The Big Short, you know are the main cause of the 2008 financial crisis. After leaving FB, Fink started Blackrock, which went public in 1999. In a few short years, he grew the company's portfolio to $1.3 trillion. That is until the whole 2008 financial crisis, which he helped cause. Blackrock, along with every other investment firm, pretty much shit the bed. But luckily, Larry caught a break. Since he was an expert on these mortgage-backed securities, Blackrock was hired by the government to manage and unwind Wall Street's toxic assets, whatever that means. And you won't believe what happened next. Blackrock's assets under management went from $1.3 trillion in 2008 to $6.3 trillion by 2018 to $14 trillion by January of this year. This is just one of many cases where BlackRock profits off of a crisis that they helped create. Now, a lot of people will blame the fact that it's impossible to buy a house on BlackRock, saying, oh, they're buying up single-family homes in massive numbers and converting them to rentals. You will have nothing and be happy. Well, all of that is true, but it's not BlackRock that's doing it, it's Blackstone. Okay, people get confused. There's similar names, I know, it's hard. But BlackRock does own part of Blackstone, which raises the question, how much influence does BlackRock have on all these companies that they own? Are they responsible for all the fucked up things that these companies are doing? I don't know, man. That's a question for a smarter person than me. I see these conspirators like this Ian Carroll idiot who will go through companies and be like, oh yeah, see, that's owned by BlackRock. Yup, BlackRock literally controls everything.
Then they own majority share in most of the companies in America. So what companies? They own Pfizer, the Moderna, they own all the airlines, they own all the social networks. So when you see all this stuff, all this agenda kind of everybody working together, then you have to realize who actually owns it.
Damn, bro, yeah, that's crazy. The company whose entire purpose is to buy stock in other companies buy stock in other companies. That's insane. You know, they also say that Larry Fink uses his positions in these companies and his massive piles of money to influence the economy and our politicians, which, I mean, yeah, this is the worst conspiracy theory of all time because it's like not a conspiracy theory, it's just the system working as intended. This is literally capitalism, bro. Bro, did you know that mega rich people control our economy and our politicians and have an undue amount of influence on our lives? Yeah, bro, pretty sure I figured that shit out when I was 12. You know, I think personally the most disturbing thing about Blackrock is they have like a supercomputer that predicts the future called Aladdin. It runs a bunch of algorithms programmed to isolate scenarios in which any given investment might fail, and it assesses risk based off of that analysis. That sounds complicated. I don't even know what I'm saying right now. Aladdin is the closest thing that the technocrats have to a god machine, and that terrifies me. Okay guys, I saved the worst for last. Galaxy gas. Founded in 2021, these giant tubes of nitrous oxide were being sold on Amazon and even at Walmart. It was because of these mother suckers that I relapsed on nitrous in 2021 after I'd been clean for over 5 years. Luckily, they went out of business last year. Good riddance, I say. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know in the comments which one of these companies you think is the most evil. Damn, man, that's long. This shit is so long.